Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, now streaming only on Netflix.
Safe consumption sites.
In the 30 years they've been in operation around the world, there have been 0 overdose deaths. 0.
One of my fears is it constitutes a degree of enabling. Hey, everybody, you are on Fill in the Blanks. As you know, my guest today is Senator Scott Wiener. He represents District 11, San Francisco and northern San Mateo County in California. Elected in 2016, Senator Wiener focused extensively on housing, transportation, civil rights, criminal justice reform, clean energy, and alleviating poverty. He does this with real passion, I can tell you. I followed his career for a good while now, and the Senator's Bill 57 would have legalized overdose prevention programs, also known as safe consumption sites, in San Francisco, Oakland, the city of LA, and LA County. And the bill was vetoed by Governor Newsom in August of this year. Of course, Senator Wiener was extremely disappointed that there was another delay in passing what he considers to be really life-saving legislation. The senator was on the show recently, and I wanted so much to drill deeper on this with him, and he's agreed to join us today. Scott, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I really wanted more time for us to talk when we were together before, because I wanted to hear what your core beliefs are about these safe consumption sites. You know that one of my fears is that it constitutes a degree of enabling and that there's not an aggressive enough exit plan. And I also recognize the positives associated with it. Why are you so passionate about this?
Sure. And I really appreciate you taking so much time to drill down on this, because it's an important issue, and people may have opinions, all over the map on these issues. But we all agree that we're in a crisis, that there are more and more people who are getting addicted, record number of overdose deaths, particularly because fentanyl is on the scene. But even before fentanyl, there were way too many overdose deaths from meth, from heroin. And, to me, the way I look at this is when you look at people using drugs, people have been using drugs for as long as we've been around, including opioids. And we have tried sort of the more tough love, trying to really berate people into not using, arresting people, incarcerating people. Nancy Reagan, Just Say No. I remember that when I was a kid, the Just Say No campaign. And for some people that works. There are some people where the tough love, put them in jail for a little while and they dry out, and that works. But for most people, it doesn't. And there are people who are just addicted, and some of them will, if offered treatment, will eventually take that treatment and become sober. There are other people who are not going to and are just going to continue using. And the way I look at it is you got to recognize the reality of where people are with these very, very addictive drugs, and try to first make sure they don't die. And that's what safe consumption sites are about, first and foremost, making sure people don't die. And then over time, building a relationship with them so they're not just treated like garbage on the streets. They actually are connecting with a social worker, with people who actually give a damn, excuse my language, about them, and then ultimately try to get them into recovery. And not everyone will get into recovery, but a lot of them will. And that's my take on it.
Well, we're talking about harm reduction, right? This is one way that it's described. And we can agree on a couple of things, I think, number one, these people are not the enemy. These are our brothers, our sisters, our sons, our daughters, their mothers and fathers of children. These are not monsters. They're not some kind of aberrant people before they got onto these drugs, and they come to them through a variety of avenues. We need to remember these are human beings, and you and I may not agree about how to get them there, but we both recognize these are human beings that deserve a chance, and we both want them to be sober and start contributing to society again, right? We can agree on that.
Right. And we can also agree that not everyone who's addicted is on the streets, right? I have a friend who he was using meth for many years. He worked in his job the entire time. And he's now sober, but it took him years to get there and various relapses, but he eventually got there. So it's not just the most obvious form of addiction that we see on the street. It's so much deeper than that.
You've heard me say that this is a disease, and that oftentimes it's the 6th or 7th attempt, even with structured rehab, before people actually finally shake this and get a lasting sober. This isn't something that you just kind of gut up and do it one day. It's a difficult thing. This is a serious disease. It's subject to relapse. It can be fatal, and often is. So I think we see it the same in terms of the gravity of it. But when we talk about this harm reduction and these safe sites, what you're advocating is that people can come to a place that has some support in terms of it's sanitary, there are clean needles, there are people there that are social workers that have an avenue towards rehab or help if they want it. There are people there that if they overdose, they can save them, whereas if they're on the street, they're simply going to die. So there are upsides to doing it the way you're talking about.
Right. And in addition, these sites will almost certainly have drug checking equipment. So right now, one of the issues with fentanyl, which is so much more, it's cheaper and more powerful than heroin. There are some markets where you can't get heroin anymore. Only fentanyl is available. But there are people who are intentionally using fentanyl because it is cheaper and more powerful. But there are others who are where it's laced, and they don't know it's laced into their heroin or their meth or whatever. And so giving them the opportunity to check the drugs so they at least know what they're taking and they're not taking something that might actually kill them.
So you'll give them a test strip so they can see whether it's laced with fentanyl?
Yeah, or there's actually some newer technology that's even better than test strips now. There's like laser technology. So that's a very important service.
Right. And y'all actually provide that for them there?
Yes.
Okay.
Or we would if we got this bill signed.
Yeah, if you got the bill signed,
Yeah.
You would provide that technology for them.
Yes.
This is Jess Betancourt, the host of DNA ID, the only true crime podcast that exclusively covers cases solved using forensic genealogy. DNA ID goes behind the headlines to answer your questions about this remarkable new crime-solving tool, how it works, how cases are selected, why the cases were unsolved for so long, and how the justice system is addressing it. I include input from law enforcement to give you the inside scoop that we all crave with a straightforward, no-nonsense delivery. You can find DNA ID on any podcast platform. Episodes come out weekly on Mondays.
I'm Katie Maloney, 37, a divorcee, and I'm out here falling in love every day with myself.
And I'm Dana Cathan, 33, former needy mess, and delusional Leo, but I've never been happier.
Never been happier.
You know that.
Good.
The foundation of this podcast is for people who want to live their life unapologetically. It's a safe space for anyone who's going through a transition in their life or just dealing with the regular bullshit.
It's a religion.
We're not saying that we're looking to start a coven, but that might be why we started this podcast.
But we're not saying that. Join our community.
The coven.
Religion.
Okay, let's just stick with community.
Listen to the podcast.
Listen to the podcast.
Now, what are the biggest objections that you hear from people in this kind of not in my neighborhood argument? And why do you think the governor vetoed this?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what people think. I'll be honest, and I think I can't remember if I said this when I was on the show, but when I first heard about this 10 or 12 years ago, I had a negative reaction at first. My initial reaction was like, whoa, that's too much. We can't do that. And then I started reading about it and reading some of the scientific studies and learning more about it. And as I learned about it, the facts were really clear to me, because this is not a new idea. These have been in operation for decades around the world with a lot of success. And so, but I had that same initial reaction. I think there are people who have the same reaction that I think you've expressed, that this might enable people. I understand that perspective. I don't agree with it, because these people are already using, and if they're using behind a dumpster or in a very unsafe setting, I don't think it's enabling. They're already determined to do it. Also, some people, I've heard people say, "Well, we're giving up on them. We're giving up on them. We're by doing this." And my view on that is, no, we're giving up on them by letting them die on the sidewalks. This is actually embracing them and showing them love, that we want them to survive and help them and offer them services. Some people who live in impacted communities, like for example, in the Tenderloin or a few other neighborhoods in San Francisco, parts of LA, have a perception that this is going to make things worse in their neighborhood, when we actually think that it'll make things better, because instead of someone using on the sidewalk, they'll use inside. There will be less syringe litter and so forth. But I understand why people have a reaction. It is, in the US, a new thing. And for people who live in impacted communities, it's tough. And I understand why they have that reaction.
I've got quote after quote after quote of people talking about walking around the Tenderloin, different areas, but certainly there, needles on the street, drug addicts laying in the gutter, defecating on the sidewalks, businesses having to close, etc. Is what you're proposing something that's designed to stop that and clean that up?
Yes. And first of all, if I could just say, the Tenderloin's gotten a lot of national news in the last year. I don't live in the Tenderloin, although my colleague in the Assembly, who represents this part of San Francisco, does live in the Tenderloin, Assembly Member Matt Haney. But I spend a lot of time in the Tenderloin. My office is right at the edge of the Tenderloin. I'm just there a lot. So I see all of this and experience it with my own eyes, even though I admittedly do not live there. But yes, if you think about it, if someone, instead of shooting up on the street, is able to go inside and use drugs there, then that is a benefit to the community. If inside there's a restroom that they can use, that is a benefit to the community. If they can not, instead of the needle falling onto the street, there's a needle disposal device, that's a benefit to the community. And so the goal here is to improve street conditions, not to have them degenerate, because they're problematic now. And I'm not saying this is a silver bullet. I want to be very clear. There's no such thing. I'm not saying this is going to solve the problem overnight, but this is one piece of the puzzle where it will have benefits for the individual and for the community. And the one thing I just want to mention to people, there was a focus group done in San Francisco with people who were injecting on the streets, because I don't inject drugs, but when I think about it, I think most people would think, wow, that's a really private thing. Why on earth would anyone want to do that in front of other people? That would seem embarrassing, mortifying. And when they asked them, why are you doing it in public view? The answer is that, well, that way, if I overdose, I won't die. Someone will see me overdosing and save me. And so that's why a lot of people will choose to go inside, because it is more dignified, and they know that they will likely not die, almost certainly not die, if they overdose in one of these places. Because in the 30 years they've been in operation around the world, there have been 0 overdose deaths, 0.
Yeah. We agree that there are areas of San Francisco that have really deteriorated, like the Tenderloin and all, where if you walk down there, you walk through with a camera, it's undeniable that it's gone to the dogs. Agreed?
Let me talk about the state of San Francisco, because sometimes when people read about what's happening in the city, they have a perception that in San Francisco, you can't walk 5 feet without stepping on a needle and human feces. In the vast majority of the geography of San Francisco, that's not the case. I am walking through the city all the time. I don't see needles that frequently. I see a lot more dog poop than human poop because people aren't always great about scooping the poop, but that's true in every city. There are a few areas in the city, and the Tenderloin is one of them that are impacted. The Tenderloin has always had major challenges, always. It has gotten worse lately. There's no doubt about it. But in the vast majority of San Francisco, that is not the case. I'm not saying we don't have issues. We do. So, but the Tenderloin has definitely gotten more impacted with drug dealing. And I think we need to address drug dealing. It's not okay for people to be doing that. And there is more open air drug use in that area. And that's why we need to reduce that. Absolutely.
Why is that? And I know, because I've been to San Francisco in recent times, and there are areas of it that are like it's always been. They're beautiful, stunning views, beautiful. And then I've been to those areas that we're talking about now that I just don't want to be there. Why has it gotten that way?
Well, I think let's keep in mind that the opioid crisis, which is this, it's also meth, but the opioid crisis has impacted the whole country, and there's been an increase in opioid use and addiction in San Francisco and elsewhere. In most parts of the country, when you're talking about some suburban or rural community, it's not in public. Everything is more spread out. Housing is more affordable. People are more likely to be housed. You're just not seeing it as much. You're seeing some of the impacts, but not seeing the raw, visceral images that we see in a place like San Francisco or Skid Row in LA. But in urban areas where everything is more concentrated, there's less space, and the cost of housing is through the roof. It used to be in San Francisco that if you had a disability check, you could afford an SRO, one of the single room occupancy hotels. You can't anymore. And so homelessness has gone up, not just in San Francisco, but everywhere. And so everything just becomes more visible. And then you put fentanyl on top of it, and that's like pouring lighter fluid on it. So I think those are some of the reasons why things have gotten worse.
And you say these safe sites are not going to be the silver bullet that fixes this. And of course, that's true. What is going to fix this for San Francisco?
San Francisco and elsewhere, we need a lot more access to treatment. It is so hard. And we do a lot of the work I do in legislature is around mental health in general, and addiction is sort of a subset of mental health, access to treatment. If someone needs you know this, right? This is your world. Getting access to a therapist, to a psychiatrist, to someone to work with you in recovery is really, really hard, even for people with resources. And if you don't have resources, it's beyond hard. And so we don't provide enough drug addiction treatment in this country. And we need to make it much easier for people to access treatment. We need to get people into housing. And in California, as you know, it is a deep crisis that we're in, and it pushes people onto the streets. And addiction can cause people to become homeless, but there are also the people who become addicted on the streets. It is just, living on the streets is one of the most stressful possible environments to be living in. And so we need to do all of these things. And we need to, and my view is once we have safe consumption sites, we should be much less tolerant of people using on the streets and be willing to say to people, you know what, there's a place you can use over there and it's going to be clean and better and they'll help you with what you need, but you can't do it here anymore. And so it gives us that opportunity to be, a little more persistent with people to say you can't use drugs in public. We have a place you can go.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more that there has to be more readily available and more plentiful sites for people to go to access treatment, whether it's inpatient rehab or intensive outpatient programs. But I think if we had 10 times the resources, there's a lot of resistance to treatment. And a lot of people that you offer treatment obviously aren't going to come rushing in the doors right now. So you've got to have some incentive to get people into treatment. And if they've got a choice between, okay, I can go to a safe consumption site and continue to take my drugs, I don't have the concern that I'm going to overdose, that's been taken off the table. So the stakes have lowered. My life is not on the line for overdosing or poisoning myself because they're testing these drugs for me. Or I can go the steeper hill and go into rehab. What's their incentive to take the steeper hill and go into rehab?
Well, in some ways, the steepest hill is to be using in a filthy street environment where you're risking your life every time you shoot up. And so I in terms of just the enabling, this idea that it enables it, I just fundamentally disagree with it, because if you think about it, if they're just using on the streets, the risks are so high of dying, of getting HIV, hepatitis, of getting an infection with a dirty needle. That is a major incentive for people not to do it, and yet they still do it. So I don't think that having one of these sites is going to make it so that, now it's really easy to use. They were doing it when it was really, 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 really hard. But if you look at the track record of these sites around the world, in Europe, Canada, Australia, I learned recently that Ukraine has safe consumption sites. This is like a normal thing in Europe. They have a good track record of getting people into treatment. Not everyone, and it doesn't always happen right away. People have to be ready, but they have a track record of getting people into treatment. If you think about it, someone who's on the street being treated like human garbage, people ignore them, they become invisible. If they're going into a site every day or a few times a week or however often they're doing it, they now have people who see them, who talk to them, who acknowledge that they are human beings. They build those relationships. And over time, it can help facilitate that person getting into treatment because they now have a degree of trust with the people that they're interacting with at these sites.
So you think relationship building is going to do it?
Again, not a silver bullet, but right. it really matters. If you think about it, the people in all of our lives who have struggled with addiction, right? It makes all the difference in the world when you have people who are persistent about saying, I want to help you, I want to help you. Again, it might take a day or a week or a year to get into that person's psyche and get them to the point where they're willing to do it. But if they're all alone and no one has that relationship with them, it makes it less likely that they'll go into treatment.
Hi, this is Rachel Yucatel, and I'm here to invite you to listen to my podcast, Misunderstood with Rachel Yucatel. This podcast delves into the lives of those who have been reduced to a single headline. Each episode will take a closer look at the stories of those who are on a mission to change their narrative. Join me as we uncover the truth behind the misconceptions, shed light on the stories of those who have perhaps been wrongfully portrayed, explore the complexities of the human experience, and celebrate the power of second chances. Who doesn't love a good comeback story?
There are over 90,000 people missing at any time, and over 500,000 are reported missing every year. And that's just in the United States. I'm Mike Morford.
And I'm Jess Betancourt. And in our podcast, Missing Persons, we discuss cases of people who have gone missing under mysterious circumstances. And we're joined in each episode by guests who are either related to the missing person, investigating their disappearance, or advocating for answers in the case.
Missing Persons is available everywhere you listen to podcasts, and there are dozens of episodes to binge on right now. Subscribe today so you don't miss an episode.
If they come to these sites, is there a limit to how often they can come? If they come every day for a month, 6 months, is there some point when you say, hey, you either got to get into treatment or we're closing the door to you?
No, I mean, it's low barrier. I don't think there is a limit. I mean, every site could do it differently, right? There's flexibility in there, and there could be different, approaches. But generally, no, you don't do that. You meet people where they are. You don't try to coerce them into treatment. That typically doesn't work. But the track record is that most people, not everyone, but most will eventually go into treatment. They have to be ready. You can coerce someone into treatment and badger them into treatment. They go into treatment. Maybe it'll work, but it probably won't, and they'll probably relapse. They have to be ready to get sober.
Were you surprised that Governor Newsom vetoed this? Did you think you had his support?
Well, my bill was pending for almost 2 years. And then before me, for the first 2 years of Governor Newsom's term, my colleague, Senator Susan Eggman, had the same bill pending. So we had, between the two of us, the bill pending for 4 years. The governor had made some positive comments publicly. When Jerry Brown vetoed a similar bill in 2018, and Governor Newsom was running for governor, he made a statement about disagreeing with Governor Brown's veto. He made a statement after he took office that he was, quote, very, very open to it. So we had gotten some not a commitment that he would sign it, but some positive signals. We did not get any negative feedback until very shortly before the bill physically went to his desk. And so at that point, I realized that he very well might veto it. But before that, he hadn't really said anything about our bill. And again, listen, I've known Governor Newsom for 22, 23 years, back to when he was a new member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in the late 90s. And I support him. I consider him a friend. I'm aligned with him on the vast majority of issues. I just really disagree with him on this one.
Is there any chance he's going to move his position on this?
I don't know. If he were to change his position, or if his folks came to us and said, hey, if you make X, Y, and Z changes, he'll sign the bill, then we would want to reintroduce the bill. But at this point, we haven't gotten that indication. And so, I would love for him to change his perspective, or at least let us know what we need to change. But again, we haven't heard anything.
You talked about a lot of people that are on drugs, are unsheltered, or you can be unsheltered and you start using drugs because of the lifestyle that you meet out there. And there are thousands of unsheltered living locations in and around cities in California and across the country. California's got the climate, of course, so I think we've got, 53% of the homeless people in the country are in California.
Of the unsheltered home, we have 25% of overall homeless, and 53% of the unsheltered homeless.
Yeah, 53% of the unsheltered, but clearly because of the climate, you'd rather be here than somewhere in North Dakota when it gets wintertime.
There's that, but also the cost of housing here is so extreme compared to most other states. That's why Utah was able to be so successful in addressing street homelessness. They were able to really quickly create housing on cheap land, which is much harder in California.
Yeah, we don't have cheap land, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah. What do you think about this move to eradicate, whether you call it a sweep or move these encampments, outlaw camping in these areas or whatever? Is this inhumane? What do you think about this? What needs to happen to these folks?
As long as we have to have somewhere for them to go. If when you sweep homeless encampments with nowhere for people to go, that's just going to reemerge somewhere else. And so it's important to have enough shelter, what we call navigation centers, which is sort of more modern, more effective version of shelters, and have places for people to be, where there's low barriers to get in there. And then I think it's not okay to have tents on sidewalks in these encampments in the middle of neighborhoods when there are places for people to go. And so, but we have to have those options for people for it to be effective.
Well, where does that come from? If we've got all of these people now, and driving to the studio today, I come down Sunset, Santa Monica Boulevard, Vine, some of the major thoroughfares in this part of LA, both sides of the street are lined with tents, and a lot of them are in front of businesses. I don't know what those people do business-wise, because people just simply won't walk through there to go through a business door. I understand these people have to have somewhere to be. I also understand these people have a business that they've got to make a living. Yeah. If they don't stay there, where do they go?
Yeah, the tent situation in LA, also in San Francisco, it's untenable. It has huge impacts on communities and huge safety issues for a variety of reasons, including to the occupants of the tents. And so that's why, but we have to have a place for them to go. And we don't have enough shelters in California in general. And there are cities that refuse to allow shelters, and we have state law that requires them to allow it, but it's still a problem. So shelters are not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution is housing, but we absolutely need more shelters. I don't know that we need to go as far as New York City, which New York City has just a massive mega shelter system, which some would say takes money away from permanent housing. But regardless, we do not have enough shelter in California. We need shelter, and it needs to be flexible shelter so that people are willing to go there. And once we have that, and I think, in some parts of the state we do better than others, I think it's not acceptable to have tents on the sidewalk. It's very, very negative for a community.
I've pulled over and talked to some of the homeless people, and I've had failed attempts and successful attempts. I've pulled over and tried to talk to some of them that are so mentally ill that they can't have a coherent conversation, some that are so drugged out they can't have a coherent conversation. I've had some that would seem to make excellent staff. They're sharp, they're focused, and they just seem so capable, yet so stuck in the situation they're in. I've talked to them about shelters, and those that can carry on the conversation, which frankly are a high percentage of them, will tell me, look, going into a shelter is not an option for me, because if I do, I can't take my belongings and they'll be gone the next morning. I have a pet. I can't take my pet, and I'm not going to abandon my pet. I have to check in and out every day. So it's not a permanent solution for me, or even a temporary situation, because I got to be out by like 7 or 8 the next morning. I have to be in by a curfew. So it's just not tenable. I'm not going to lose what little I own or abandon my pet. And it's not safe in there, by the way. So you can talk about shelters to me, but I'm not going in there, is what they tell me. It's just not a good idea.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. And that's why we have this newer model called navigation centers. And what a navigation center is, it allows for an entire encampment or a group of people just to bring everything in and be there and not have those same really strict rules that are a incentive for people not to go. And so at these navigation centers, people can bring their dogs, they can bring their belongings, as long as they don't have weapons or something that, and they can also, instead of being gender segregated, they can go in, with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You don't have to be separated. And they provide various navigation services there. People are interested in trying to pursue housing or addiction treatment, or they have another health problem, or their dog is sick and they need, their dog to get veterinary attention. They provide that. And we have them in San Francisco. They've been very successful. They are a good model to, over time, replace the traditional shelter system, because they are much more flexible. You don't have to leave at 7 a.m. And it creates a better incentive for people to actually take advantage of it.
Okay. Are these climate-controlled buildings? Are they warehouses? What are they?
They vary. In San Francisco, we have a few of them that are outdoors. Uh-huh. So it's a
fenced-in area,
fenced-off, fenced-in area, but it's outdoors. And for example, we had one in the Mission. There was a parking lot that was going to be developed for housing, but it wasn't going to be for a few years. So they allowed the city leased it at a very low rent for a few years as an outdoor navigation center. Others where it's outdoors, but they built these smaller structures, so there are indoor spaces. There are some navigation centers where they'll buy an old building that has rooms in it, and people get to stay in a room. So it's not permanent housing, but you have your own space. And so it's a very flexible model, and it can be in a lot of different kinds of configurations.
Now, what's the cost of having somebody in a navigation center as opposed to having them in a temporary housing or housing?
I think it depends on where you are. San Francisco, it's probably going to be a lot cheaper than, substantially cheaper than having someone in housing. In a lower cost area, it might be a little bit closer. I don't, off the top of my head, know the exact current cost of having someone in a navigation center. It can be done. There's a real cost. I mean, it needs to be appropriately staffed. You need to have the right supplies there, the right services there. So, being able to offer people services.
But it's cheaper. It's cheaper than housing.
It is cheaper than housing.
What I'm trying to think of is if we can come up with a plan that gets people off the sidewalks, that keeps the merchants from being in a hardship situation, then it seems to me that is a viable alternative. And I was reading about your navigation centers. I know there are a couple of places in LA that are just that. They're really big fenced off areas, and they do have security on the gates. They're not armed, but they're patrols that go through, and they do have radios so they can call for help if they need, for medical help or whatever.
Right.
And I just got the sense that people felt a lot safer in that environment than they did just out on the street.
Yeah, I think they work well. And we've actually made some changes to state law. I had a legislation I authored that was enacted in the law to make it easier for people to open up these kinds of navigation centers. Because there's always community resistance. And a lot of times they're mad that people are on the street, but then when you try to create other options, they oppose that too. And so we tried to make it easier and more streamlined to get them open.
Yeah, it seems to me that if any gradation that we can do from these people just being out on the street or an underpass, it seems to me that it's a step up for them. It's a step up security-wise, and it's a move towards them holding themselves to a higher standard. For example, in a navigation center, if people can be required to clean up their space, their area, they have different requirements. I just worry that any strategy that we take that doesn't require the person to do everything they can do to be self-sufficient, to live with dignity, if we don't require them to do everything they can do, we're cheating them out of making progress. From a psychological standpoint, that's a big deal to me.
Yeah, I agree that we need to try to give people the tools and, of course, encourage people to try to stabilize, and we want them to get healthy I've met, one of the great things about San Francisco, I love the city for so many reasons, with all of its challenges, is that people here are super engaged politically, and they know who their elected officials are, and including the homeless people. So almost every day, at some point, or more than once a day, I'll be walking down the street, and a homeless person will come up to me and they'll be like, "Oh, you're Senator Wiener," and they tell me what they think about everything. You talk to them. And I also meet a lot of people who used to be homeless in San Francisco and who now are in supportive housing or some sort of housing, and talk to me about how thankful they are that the city, provided them with that hand up. And there are people who still, when Gavin Newsom was mayor of San Francisco, this was a big priority for him, focusing resources on getting people into permanent supportive housing. And there are still people who come up to me and say, "I will vote for Gavin Newsom forever because that guy got me off the street and I am stable today because of him." And so I agree that we need to do everything in our power to make that happen.
What do you think about law enforcement with regard to shoplifting in the San Francisco area? Because you've gotten a lot of press up there for not prosecuting retail shoplifting. It doesn't seem to be organized crime shoplifting. It seems to be individualized shoplifting, particularly in drugstores and things of that nature. But it doesn't seem to be enforced much at the arrest level, and it seems that a lot of even the misdemeanor citations that are given ultimately get dismissed. Where do you come down on that?
Yeah, and the retail theft has been a huge issue in a lot of places in San Francisco and other parts of the Bay Area, in Southern California too. It's something that has been in other parts of the country. It's been the big, and it's horrible. It's unacceptable. And a lot of it is organized crime. Yes, there are random people who steal a little bit here and there, but there's a lot of organized retail theft that's happening, and it needs to be. People need to be arrested. They need to be accountable. When it's organized retail theft, they should be prosecuted. For the person who's just like down and out and shoplifting for that, there are diversion programs that we can have for people. Not everyone needs to be going to jail or prison, but especially for the organized retail theft, it's so damaging. And the Walgreens in my neighborhood, I live in the Castro, and it's a big Walgreens, open 24 hours a day. Almost every time that I go in there to get everything, I have to have them unlock it for me because, it just changes the experience for everyone. And, a lot of these Walgreens and CVSs, they'll hire an off-duty police officer to stand there, which has a positive impact, but they shouldn't have to bear that expense. So we do need to make sure that we're holding people accountable, particularly for the organized retail theft.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I have one final question.
Yep.
It's always the final question that gets you right. I talk to a lot of people in politics, state, local, and national. You are uncommonly passionate about the things that you advocate for. What got you onto this path, Scott?
I grew up in southern New Jersey, a Jewish kid, Jewish family, one of two Jews in my high school class of 550. Enormous anti-Semitism growing up. And I wasn't from a political family, but early on, I sort of realized that, politics is sort of it's a matter of life and death, right? It's not just, am I happy with this or unhappy with that? It's a matter of life and death. And I got really passionate as a teenager. And my parents never understood why I wanted to volunteer on campaigns, but I just started to do it. And over time, as a gay man, I came out during college and got really active in the community. And I didn't want to run for office. But I saw over time the intersection between working to make your community better and what happens in politics. And so even though politics can be icky, it's not always, pleasant. I saw that you can make change. And for me, being in office, I don't want to say I have no ego. We all have an ego. But if I were just in office just to have the title and to have people be deferential to me because I have the word senator before my name, I wouldn't do it. I'd be bored out of my mind. So I have a shelf life as an elected official. We have term limits in California. I'm not going to be here forever. And I want to be able to say that when I'm done, whether I'm tossed to the curb at some point or I term out or whatever, that I've left things a little bit better than when I found them. And the thing that gets me up in the morning is when someone comes up to me on the street and says, because of a bill that you did that got signed into law, something is better in my life, that gives me a natural high for weeks. And so that's why I do it.
Well, you've got to be seeing the effects of that now with the things you're doing, because you're doing things that affect those that don't have a voice for themselves. It seems like you're spending your time and your energy for those that need it the most. I know it's a tough hill, and you work so hard to get a bill passed, and then here you come and it gets knocked down. But whether everybody agrees with you or not, they can't disagree with your goal, and they can't disagree with the population that you're trying to help. You've made a fan out of me in terms of the things that you're trying to do, and I hope we can stay in touch and talk about this some more.
Yeah.
Because I think that this problem's not going to go away soon, and it's certainly not one-dimensional. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And I'm just, and thank you for those kind words. And I'm just so appreciative of your in-depth engagement on this, because you have a lot of people tune in for you and listen to you. And I think you're really giving a lot of people opportunity to really look under the hood and see what's happening here.
Well, like you say, under the hood, there's a lot of moving parts to this, and hopefully we can come up with some solutions. I hope we can continue our dialogue, and when you need something, you let me know, and let's continue to talk about this and keep people engaged along the way. So I hope to talk to you soon, and I wish you nothing but the best. Thanks for all your insights today.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye. Have a good one.